Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Fort Wayne Local Podcast. I'm your host, Jake McAfee. Today, I'm joined by the Executive Director of the Allen County SPCA, Jessica Henry. Jessica, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Jake.
Yeah, we're excited. It's kind of a fun one. We've been doing a lot of business-heavy, interviews, and this will be a fun one, I think, that more people can relate to. So, quick background on Jessica. She grew up in Fort Wayne. She's the youngest of 17 children. So I just interviewed her brother, Mayor Tom Henry. And before we were talking off air, I didn't realize you guys were siblings. And I thought I was interviewing two people in a row who had 17 or 16 siblings. I'm like, Fort Wayne
It
is
could
something.
happen. It could happen in Fort Wayne, but this is the same family.
It could. My grandma's one of 11, so you can't rule it out. So, okay. And then you graduated from St. Joseph's College. You're a lifelong animal lover, but it says you didn't get into animal welfare until you started volunteering in your mid 30s.
That's right.
And you left corporate America in 2012 to take the helm at the SPCA. And in your 8 years, adoptions are up 500%. So that's awesome. You helped legalize life-saving TNR programs for community cats, created the region's most comprehensive pet retention program, and you ushered in the merger between the Allen County SPCA and Hope for Animals. And that's something we're going to kind of get into in this interview as well. But kind of starting with the basics, how do animals end up in the SPCA? Like, where do they typically come from?
Well, I'll start by telling you we actually are fortunate to have two shelters in Fort Wayne. So we have a municipal shelter, that's Fort Wayne Animal Care and Control. And then we have the Allen County SPCA, which is a nonprofit humane society.
Okay.
And they have lots of similarities and lots of differences. But animals can end up at either shelter a number of ways. And at the Allen County SPCA, they end up with us primarily three different ways. One is owner surrendered. If people feel like they can't keep their animal for some reason, they might bring it to the SPCA. The other is intake from Fort Wayne Animal Care and Control. So our two organizations work together, even though we're not directly affiliated with one another. The SPCA's mission is to reduce euthanasia in our community. And one way we can do that is by eliminating the overcrowding at Fort Wayne Animal Care and Control. So we try to bring in as many animals from them as we can.
Okay, that makes sense. And then at any given time, how many animals do you guys have? Do you know like a running average or roughly like what you have in house there?
Well, when we're not in a pandemic, we typically have about 100 or 120 animals at any given time. And at the SPCA, we only have adoptable cats and dogs.
Okay,
Whereas animal control has small animals, birds, even some reptiles from time to time.
gotcha. Okay, and do you know how many you guys have getting adopted every month?
Yes, we like to send home as close to 200 animals as we can. So we try to save the lives of 2,500 animals a year is kind of our goal. Now, of course, 2020 was a weird year. We
Mm-hmm.
didn't see as many animals coming in, and we had to move to adoptions by appointment. So we weren't sending as many animals home. But when it's not a weird pandemic year, we try to save the lives, as I said, of about 2,500 animals a year.
That's awesome. And I mean, just side note, I just sell houses. So when I hear you're like saving animals' lives, I'm like, man, that's some people are just more important. What's what's the
Everybody needs
capacity?
a house to live in.
You're
So
right.
don't.
They do. They do. That's correct. What's the capacity at the shelter? Like how many can you handle or what happens if you start to get at that capacity?
Well, we're smart. We're a limited admission facility, so we don't let ourselves get overcrowded. If we start to get on the verge of overcrowding, and that would mean probably closer to like say 40 dogs and maybe 100 cats, we would start running adoption promotions. We would start leaning on our foster community so that those animals were moving out of the shelter and just temporarily staying in homes if we felt that we were getting to a point where we were overcrowded.
Okay. And can visitors stop by? I mean, I know we're going to talk about the adoption process, the foster program, but can just random visitors stop by and like play with the animals or pet them?
They used to be able to, but not right now, unfortunately. So we are working by appointment only, just to be careful with the number of people coming through the shelter. So right now, you have to have an appointment to be able to come in and visit with the animals. but we're looking forward to a return to the old days when people could come in and just hang out with cats and dogs.
Okay, but I could, like, if I wanted to bring my kids in, we could do that. We could set an appointment and stop by and like pet the animals and
And
stuff.
maybe I wasn't clear. I want you to come in with the idea of adopting an animal to meet a
Ah,
specific animal. So we don't even have appointments available just for hanging out with the animals right now.
okay. And then is that the plan once COVID lifts or the restrictions lift? They maybe would be open to that down the road.
Yes, and we'll probably still do it by appointment, but you're right, Jake. At that point, we would be able to allow the general public to come in for a number of reasons, not just adopting an animal.
Okay, because as I told you off air, I have my fourth child, and my kids want pets so bad, and I'm like, maybe I can just take them there and play with some pets, and then we can
You know,
scratch.
that's dangerous, Jake. Not very many people walk into an animal shelter and leave empty-handed.
Actually, that's good call on that.
I mean,
Maybe.
I encourage it, but I'm just letting you know.
No, I hear you. I hear you. Okay, that's great. So take me through the adoption process. Like, let's say I want to adopt. What's the first thing I need to do?
Well, first of all, you can always see who's available for adoption on our website, or we also try to update our social media every night. But if you're watching our website and you have an animal that kind of catches your eye, it's easy. You just click the adoption application right there on our website, and it's simple process. It's just a one page, it's done autofill right there on the website. And then the staff at the SPCA gets a notification that there's an application. We run through that process very quickly. We're checking for just a couple of basic things. We're looking at whether or not your pet at home, if you have pets at home, is current on vaccines. And we're also going to do a very basic criminal background check just to make sure that you don't have any animal cruelty convictions or
Sure.
domestic violence. A background of domestic violence for us, there's also a correlation between domestic violence and people who might be abusive to animals as well. So we quickly run through that process, and then we give you a call to let you know when your application's been approved. That's usually the same day or maybe the next day, depending on when you've applied. And then you schedule an appointment to come see us. And we have 5 appointments for dogs and 5 appointments for cats every day. So you usually can get in that same day to visit with the animal. And if it's a good match, you can take the animal home the same day.
That's awesome. That's great. Okay. And then is there any kind of like follow up or monitoring? Like once the pet is out the door, what's the process from there?
That's a really great question. You know, we talked about that 500% increase in adoption. That's because when I first got to the SPCA, it used to take up to 5 days to adopt an animal.
Oh
We
no.
would check references, we would check your employment history, all kinds of things and hoops to jump through. And it took forever to adopt an animal. But then once you adopted the animal, you never heard from us again. And I started thinking that's kind of backwards, right? We want animals to be able to get into homes, especially if we're trying to reduce euthanasia. So maybe we need to make it simpler, a simpler process to adopt the animal, but then stay more connected on the backside of the adoption. So you actually get follow up phone calls from us. You get an email almost immediately after you adopt, and then you'll get a follow up phone call 1 week later and 1 month later. And both of those phone calls will come from volunteers, but it's just an opportunity for us to make sure that the pet is a good fit in your home. And if you're having any issues, it's a chance for us to be able to help you address those issues.
That's great. And then do you have any examples of where maybe it wasn't a good fit? Like, I'm thinking maybe just kind of take the pressure off somebody. Let's say they adopt a pet and it's not what they thought it was going to be. What's the process from there if they think maybe it's not a good fit for them?
So they would need to give us a call. And I'm not going to fib to you. I want to try to make it work. I want to make sure that we didn't give you unrealistic expectations or that you didn't come in with unrealistic expectations. So we'll talk you through it and say, okay, if your animal's having accidents in the house, for example, that can be a big one, right? So we'll talk to you about what are you trying to do to help with potty training. But if it turns out that there are other issues or it's just too much for your family or you're finding that the animal is just not a good fit, we would schedule an appointment for you to bring that animal back. We don't like it if people just come unannounced because, as I mentioned, we try to manage our population, right? We don't want to get overcrowded. So I might not have an open kennel today for you to bring that dog back, but I'll probably have one tomorrow. So I might say, hey, Jake, can you hold off, bring the dog back tomorrow? Or again, we'd ask you to maybe try to work with a few new training techniques for a few days. And if it doesn't get any better and you absolutely can't make it work, then we would schedule a time for you to bring the animal back.
That's great. Okay. And then we mentioned the foster program. So what's involved in that process?
We actually have a couple of different types of fostering opportunities available. First of all, fostering is great because a lot of people like the idea of having a pet, but maybe their work doesn't allow for them to, maybe they work long hours or they travel a lot, for example, but they might have intermittent periods where they're able to keep an animal temporarily. So fostering is kind of the best of both worlds, right? You get a dog or a cat for a little while, but it's not this lifetime commitment to an animal. It's easy to foster with us. The foster application is right on our website. We do the same things that we do when processing an adoption application in order to approve our fosters. And then you join this network of incredible lifesavers because if you think about it, the shelter could only house a certain amount of animals. So let's say we can have 100 animals at any given time. But if 10 people foster for us, then we can have space for 110 animals.
Hmm.
So it really increases our capacity for life saving when we have new fosters. So once you fill out that foster application, you can foster a couple of different types of animals. Number one would be animals that are too young to be in the shelter. So puppies or neonate kittens. Number two would be animals that might have some behavior issues that we think would improve if they were in a home. So, for example, the dog kennels can be very stressful, Jake. So, some dogs just don't want all the noise. They don't want to be surrounded by a whole bunch of other dogs. But when they get into a foster home, they relax and we can see what their real personalities are like. The third and most, I think, unknown type of fostering that we offer is called compassion fostering. And this is for pet owners who are in temporary personal crisis. So if you think about COVID, we
Hmm.
had people who had to go to the hospital temporarily. In the old days, those animals would be surrendered to a shelter because they were going to be in the hospital for who knows how long, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Now we will temporarily take animals in and then reunite them with their pet owners when the pet owners get over whatever it is that had been surrendering their animals to the shelter in the first place. So we think COVID-19, we think the elderly who have to have some long-term hospitalization or maybe rehabilitation. And then really powerfully is victims of domestic violence who are seeking a safe haven. They need to go to the shelter, for example. A lot of people won't leave an abusive spouse because the threat is there that if you leave, I'll hurt the animal.
Oh,
Well, this
jeez.
gives, yeah, that's a big deal. So this gives women, for example, the opportunity to come bring their dog or cat to us for safe harbor while they seek their own help for themselves and or their children in a domestic violence shelter. Once they get out of that shelter and on their feet, we can reunite them with their pets. So we are really working. We talked at the beginning about pet retention. That's what we're talking about. When we talk about pet retention, how do we keep pets with the people who love them?
That's amazing. You think we were talking about animals, but really, I mean, it comes back to people, in the
It does.
community, and
An animal is not a pet without a person, right?
yeah.
So in order to be a pet, you've got to have a family, and we're all about keeping families and pets together.
So how long does the pet typically live with the foster family? Is there like a set thing? I know obviously if someone's in the hospital, that may be indefinite, but is there something they can expect, like a 2 week, or is it just
Sure.
day
So
by
it
day?
depends. If you're fostering little kittens or puppies, the animals have to be 8 weeks of age before they can go on the adoption floor. So if you get them when they're 2 days old, you've got a 2 month commitment to
Okay.
puppies or kittens, right? But if you're doing compassion fostering, we typically try to foster for about 30 days. Now we will offer a 30-day extension if the person is working toward the homeless situation or the domestic violence situation, or if we think it's going to be 6 weeks, their doctor says they'll be better in about 6 weeks. So typically no more than 2 months. We don't want animals to live in a shelter or in a foster home indefinitely. But
Hmm.
the idea is for us just to have that safety net there for pet owners who love their animals and don't want to surrender them to the shelter. We'd like to be able to try to find as many ways as possible to keep those families together.
Okay, so just kind of a case by case basis,
That's
depending on whatever the situation is. Okay. And then is there any type of financial assistance if you're a foster family? Because obviously there's food, there's medicine, there's shots. Like how does that factor into the process?
Great question. You pay for nothing. All we ask for our fosters is to provide a safe place and lots of love. We pay for everything. We provide the food, we provide crates or litter boxes. Certainly, all of the animals will come fully vaccinated, spayed or neutered, microchipped. They're going to be in as tip top a shape as we can get them before they go to the foster home. Now, if you're medically fostering for us, obviously the animal's going to need to go to some doctor's appointments or some vet appointments, but we pay for all of that. You may need to provide some transportation, but even if you can't do that, we'll have volunteers or staff who can come pick up and transport the animal. We're really just asking our fosters to provide that safe space and lots of love.
That's great. That's great. Okay, is there? I don't want to put you on the spot here, but is there any like special success stories that kind of stand out to you?
Oh, so there's a success story every day. When you work in animal welfare, there's a success story every day. But we shared a story. It's been a month ago or more now that really sticks in my mind. And it was an older woman who came in with her son, and her son was on the autism spectrum. And they adopted a wonderful dog from us named Roxy. And it was a great fit for them. And then unfortunately, they suffered a house fire.
Mm.
And she called us and said, I don't have anywhere for Roxy to go. So Roxy was able to come back to us for compassion foster while their home got fixed up, insurance, the whole 9 yards. That takes a minute, right?
Mhm.
And then once the house was fixed up and they could move back in, volunteers and staff from the shelter went and built Roxy a new fence at the house because she kind of had a little bit of a damaged fence. So I think that's evidence of not just a great foster reuniting story, but also the lengths that the Allen County SPCA will go to make sure that animals are healthy and happy in their forever homes.
Yeah, you're not there to just check a box or,
Right.
follow like a certain, I mean, obviously you have protocols, but I feel like you're there to make sure that the job is done and there's no bureaucracy getting in the way of like taking care of the animal and then the owners as well. So
That's exactly right.
that's
The hardest,
fantastic.
the hardest challenge we have in sheltering is not having more of one type of animal. So for example, if we have a really fluffy dog available for adoption, the last week we had 60 applications for one dog.
Whoa.
60. And we know that 59 families are going to be disappointed, right?
Yeah.
So I always have to think, okay, this is not Target. I don't have a whole bunch more of this, and I have this one. So that's kind of the biggest disappointment is when people really have their hearts set on an animal, and we wish we had what everybody wants all the time. But I will always say, if you are patient, if you really want to save a life through pet adoption and you're patient, we'll find a perfect match for your family.
Yeah, and you've referenced the website a couple times. I'll link to it in our
Perfect.
post when we post this. So if people want to monitor the site and find one that works for them, that'd be great. So we talked about, providing the funding and all the things that you guys do. Where does your funding come from?
We are this community's only 100% donor supported animal shelter. So we accept donations from individuals. Of course, we get some foundation funding. A very small percentage of our funding comes from our adoption fees because, for example, you can adopt a cat at the SPCA for any donation amount that works for you. We call it name your own adoption fee. So it's not a great business model, but it works to save lives. It works to get pets in the homes. But the average adoption fee for a dog is $100. But we will have several $100s invested in that animal through spay neuter, through vaccines, through just day-to-day care for the animal. So, but yes, 100% donor supported. So if you're looking to support your local animal shelter, we ask people to consider the Allen County SPCA.
Okay. And then are you still accepting volunteers at the shelter?
Yes, absolutely. Both at the shelter and at our spay neuter clinic. And the same thing applies, as I mentioned earlier, on our website. You can complete the volunteer application right there. We have an online orientation that you'll go through, and then we'll get you hooked up with our volunteer coordinator. And the best thing about the SPCA is we want it to be a positive volunteer experience. So we won't just make you do laundry all day, Jake. I don't know if you do laundry at home, but it's really hard to do it at the animal shelter. So we will get you paired up doing what it is that will keep you coming back to volunteer more.
Okay, that's great. Actually, an agent on my team, Jamie Espinoza, just filled out her application and is going to start volunteering there. We're pretty excited about that.
Excellent.
What roles do you have then? Is there like, you mentioned you want it to be a good fit. What are some of the different options that volunteers can do?
Anything that it takes to run a household, we need to help run our animal shelter. So we've got people who walk dogs, for example. We have people who just socialize cats. We have people who help us clean in the shelter. We have people who work on our spay neuter clinic, making sure the surgical instruments are sterilized, or people answering phones, or people who are doing offsite adoption events. When we are out at pet stores in the community with our adoptable dogs, we need volunteers to handle those animals at those events. So we have lots and lots of different ways. And we also have volunteer opportunities for people who can't come to the shelter for one reason or another, whether they're not healthy or physically able to, they can make follow-up phone calls for us, or they can help us with mailers, things like that. So we've got a number of ways that people can get involved in our life-saving work.
That's great. I like that from home too. I'm thinking like what just popped in my head was maybe retirees or,
Mhm.
especially those are high risk for COVID. It's like if you
Sure.
still want to contribute to this, they need the help even from home.
Exactly. And even young kids who, might not be able to come to the shelter. If you've got a 5-year-old at home, we have great volunteer ideas, things, little projects and crafts that they can do at home that are enrichment for the animals. So, for example, soaking cotton balls in catnip. And then we put them out in the cat colonies. And that's something that, young kids can do and feel like they're contributing as well.
That's a light bulb moment for me right there. My kids love doing crafts and pets, so I think we might be able to make it
They
happen.
can make cat toys. We got all kinds of things they can do. So, absolutely.
Awesome. I'm glad I asked about that. Okay, so we referenced earlier the merger of the SPCA and Hope. The SPCA, by the way, is Society of Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, and Hope is Humane Organization for the Prevention of Euthanasia. How did that play out, and why did those two organizations merge?
Well, about 10 years ago, we had really abysmal euthanasia rates here in Fort Wayne, really, really high numbers. And both the Allen County SPCA and Fort Wayne Animal Care and Control knew that there had to be another answer. And that answer was the creation of a high volume, low cost spay neuter clinic right here in our community. And so at that time, Hope for Animals was born. So this is a low cost opportunity for people to get their animals spayed or neutered, thereby reducing the overpopulation or the number of unwanted litters of kittens or puppies that was happening in our community at the time. So once Hope for Animals came about, they operated here for 10 years in our community, spaying and neutering upwards of 100,000 animals in the last 10 years, which is just phenomenal. And when their executive director announced that she was going to be stepping down about a year ago, it got my wheels turning, knowing that most animal shelters our size have a spay neuter component, and we didn't have one at the time. I got to thinking, this might be a really good match. And so we reached out to the Follinger Foundation here in Fort Wayne for funding, and they funded us a consultant to help us kind of check the boxes and walk through the steps of merger and to determine both boards of directors whether or not this was as good a match as I was hopeful it would be. And that determination was subsequently made. And on January 1st of this year, so just 2 months ago, that merger became official, and we are a legally merged organization operating under the 501c3 of the Allen County SPCA. For no other reason than we were the older organization. We've been around 70 years in this community. So now both organizations are under the umbrella of the Allen County SPCA, and I spend my mornings at the shelter on Hannah Street and my afternoons at the clinic on Maycrest.
That's great. Okay. And how do you know if you're qualified to have your pet spayed or neutered there? Like, is there certain qualifications? Is there a certain income threshold? Like, who's eligible to bring it in, bring their pet
Anybody
in?
can bring their animal to the clinic here at 1333 Maycrest for spay, neuter, or wellness services. There's no litmus test for that.
Okay.
But I do want to remind people that this is a high volume spay neuter clinic and wellness. And wellness just means vaccines, preventatives like flea and tick or heartworm preventative. We do some basic heartworm testing, some skin things, but this is not to replace a person's relationship with their private veterinarian by any stretch. Animals who are sick need to see a veterinarian. They have diagnostic capabilities at a private veterinarian that we don't have here at this clinic. So this is more of just like it says, a clinic and some basic care available. But we will always be able to refer people out to a private veterinarian if their animal needs something beyond what we can provide, and if the pet owner doesn't already have an established relationship with a vet here in Fort Wayne.
Okay, that's great. This has been amazing. I did some research on this, and I still learned a lot throughout this conversation. So I hope other people feel the same way. Um, Something I end with, and I like to ask everyone: what's your favorite thing about living here in Fort Wayne?
um, that's a great question. My favorite thing about living in Fort Wayne is that it's a little big town. I feel like I know a lot of people here, and I feel like there's a lot of love in this community. I feel like it has a little bit of everything. My fiance just moved here from Chicago, and I was afraid that he wasn't going to have enough interesting stuff to do here, right? But the reality is we have a ballet, we have our own art museum, we have something for everybody here. And you don't have all the big city stuff that nobody likes to deal with, but you have enough great things happening that if you're bored in Fort Wayne, that's your own fault.
Yeah, well said. Well said. So we referenced your website. How else can people connect with you or the SPCA if they want to learn more, they want to volunteer, any of the programs we talked about?
Well, it is AllenCountySPCA.org, or follow us on social media. We have very active Facebook page as well as Instagram and Twitter. And hopefully in the not too distant future, people can just stop on by and learn more about us in person.
That's great. I promise I will be there once that's allowed. So, well, Jessica, thank you so much for your time. This was incredibly informative. I learned a lot. I think the listeners will as well. So we really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jake. Have a great day.